Welcome to ShipTalk. My name is Nic Acton. I'm a sales engineer here at Harness. I'm here with Ron Gidron from xtype, which is doing a lot of DevOps for other modalities that we all may not be as familiar with ServiceNow. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and everything there. But Ron, thank you so much for coming on the show. Wanted to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then let's take the conversation from there.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Great to be here. I appreciate it. You also pronounced my name right, which is very rare. So thanks. It's great to be here.
Thank you. So let's get started, and of course we'll make this more conversational as we go. But definitely want to learn more about you in general. What is your background, and how did you get into software delivery, DevOps, everything like that?
Great. So I'm Israeli born and bred. I started my career, my tech career in the 90s, and I went to work for a test automation company. So automation was kind of right there in the beginning. I worked for one of the pioneers of the test automation industry, this company called Mercury Interactive. And we built load and functional testing tools, automated testing tools. So I spent 10 years there, kind of saw the internet, come alive, and then spent another 10 years in two different monitoring companies, database monitoring, transaction tracking, things of that nature. And then went back into the automation space around about 2008. I worked for one of the early DevOps, I think, startups that were there. A company called Nolio did release automation for, on-prem Java servers and stuff like that. Then went on to a different company called UC4 Atomic, helped build again, release automation DevOps product. And, so I've been in the space for a long time. Automation, DevOps are something that I've kind of done my whole career.
Nice. So you've been there since really the beginning of DevOps, and probably have an interesting perspective. I've only been in it for coming up on a decade, so you're gonna have a lot more insight there. But what is it you're all doing today? And maybe we'll work backwards. What are you all doing today with xtype, and why is that important?
All right, great. So xtype is a multi-instance management platform for ServiceNow. And our mission is to help ServiceNow customers maximize their investment in ServiceNow through multi-instance management, which I'll get into in a minute. Three main capabilities that is gonna come around to DevOps in a minute. That's visibility, governance, and automation. In order to understand how what I've just said is connected to DevOps, a good place to start is by realizing that a lot of platforms out there, ServiceNow in particular, don't exactly work the same way that generalized development works. I mean, if you look at ServiceNow development, you're going to see the exact, you're going to see JavaScript, and you're going to see a lot of the same programming languages. However, the work is being done, whether you're developing an app from scratch or customizing an existing app, is done within a platform. So you can think of it, I don't know if you want to go back a little bit back in history, you can think of other platforms that were there. SAP was there. And so if you're going to write an SAP application, you're doing it within the boundaries of SAP, and you're attached to that architecture. Today, if you're developing on the Salesforce platform, you're doing it in a particular way. There's multiple ways, but you're doing it on their architecture. So I think the main difference is, if you're out in the open, you work on software projects that the architecture is basically chosen by the team, programming language chosen by the team, databases, infrastructure, everything's chosen by the team. At the end, modern development all starts with a code base, maybe even your infrastructure as code. It all starts with version control with Git across everything. But then there's a lot of development in the world that's done on top of existing platforms, and so the base development architecture is just not the same.
Right. So The ServiceNow DevOps is fascinating to me because, and you bring up a lot of excellent points, which is, you know, at the end of the day, we're all doing DevOps on a platform of some kind, whether that happens to be ServiceNow or whether that happens to be a virtual machine sitting in Amazon Web Services running, something a little less, no code and everything as ServiceNow would say, although there's plenty of code behind ServiceNow. Um, you know, what's maybe some of the major differentiations someone should be thinking about when they're thinking of like traditional DevOps versus like ServiceNow DevOps or even broader SaaS DevOps for what it's worth?
Right. So I think this applies to the broader SaaS DevOps. The I think the main difference is this. When you choose a platform as your base, and there's plenty good reasons to do that, right? Certain types of applications you wouldn't want to start from scratch. Why would you? So let me give you an example. You want a ticketing system, you want a system to manage IT, you want a system to manage HR, you want a system to manage lots of things, right? You could just build it from scratch, right? We'll start from scratch, make deer and run from there. But you'd be building so much of the stuff that's already built that if you're an organization, it just doesn't make any sense to build that type of application yourself. So you're going to go out and find a platform that already does it. Let's say ServiceNow, right? Now you're going to start from some sort of a base and you're going to customize it to your own needs. Now you've got that platform, you're going to develop some new stuff on the platform, which is very, very commonplace. And so, like I said, you are starting at a point that's different to traditional development. And so now you have and this is the key. So now you have your code base, but you also have the vendor code base. They're two separate code bases because the vendor is working on the platform, right? ServiceNow releases every 6 months. There's a new release. Salesforce, every whatever. There's a release. So you can think of it almost like two different code bases that kind of have to align the whole time. Your code and the vendor code, right? You don't own the vendor code. You have no access to their repos or code base. You own yours, but you're dependent on them because if they make a change to an API, then your changes have to happen. And then there's other stuff that is very different because sometimes you'll add a plugin or a third-party application. It's just a different mode of building
Right.
on a platform versus building on code base.
Right. And it's interesting to have these conversations with customers, and I've got many that I've been writing down, but I'm really happy to be talking with you on the podcast just because this is becoming more and more prevalent across the space. I think one really interesting question that I've kind of thought of, and I think you'd have fantastic insight into is, we have a lot of customers that we talk with at Harness or prospects we talk with at Harness that are sometimes relatively early in their journey in terms of, hey, we are going to utilize software in order to solve a specific set of business use cases and everything. And one of those key early questions they are kind of asking themselves is do we bring on a team of full stack engineers and build it end to end? Or do we go with something like a Pega, ServiceNow, a Salesforce, or anything like that? How would you maybe talk to someone through that situation? What are some parameters and everything they should consider to make an intelligent decision there?
Yeah, so it really is a great question. So let me just try and bullet point this, so to speak. Okay. So bullet point number one: don't reinvent the wheel, unless you have a very specific reason to, reinvent a database. Why would you? I mean, there's probably someone out there who needs their own database that isn't one of the ones that we know, and there's good reason to do it. That's like sort of really on the edge, right? And I would expect that the same sort of rule applies to most software if we're talking about business software. So there's you really so this is, at the end of the day, this is about cost of ownership and technical debt that you're taking on, right? So if you're really starting from scratch, I would say, the pros and cons would be obviously the flexibility and the total control that starting from scratch gives you, right? Versus the technical debt that you're going to end up owning and maintaining. And then all of this has to kind of get sort of factored into some financial projection in terms of cost of ownership and, you know, what are the true costs of this over time. So that's one. The other is systems don't live in isolation. So if you're thinking about a particular system today, don't just think of it as the one system, but also think, you know, what other integrations, what other systems do I need to build later or interact with later? And so all of those things need to be taken into consideration. I think for enterprise use cases, particularly, starting from scratch probably doesn't make sense for most, I would say, IT use cases that are there.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So you've built a whole company out of you know, basically doing the DevSecOps process around ServiceNow. And you bring up interesting points as to the, you know, hey, they own some of the code, you're going to own some of your own code and everything like that. I guess one kind of question is, what do you say to people that are kind of like, oh, well, and maybe this is a controversial question, hey, you know, we already spent all this money on ServiceNow, we're just going to kind of go it on our own and, you know, not worry so much about the DevSecOps parts. What considerations are they not making and what challenges might they face?
So let me just make sure I understand the question. You're asking me if someone would tell me, hey, we're thinking about getting off ServiceNow?
No, there's someone who is like, hey, we're about to adopt ServiceNow. We're not going to utilize any other tool sets or anything like that. We're just going to use us only what ServiceNow gives us to get the job done.
Oh, well, if you can do that, that's fine. If you can do it, just, you know, if ServiceNow covers 100% of your requirements and you're just happy with out of the box, you know, I wouldn't push you to change anything. And so absolutely. And ServiceNow does do that for a majority. By the way, that is I think the main reason, like, you know, if you ask yourself, what's the real value of a platform as a service like ServiceNow, like Salesforce, is that they've actually built 90% or more the common denominators of, you know, business requirements X, managing a CRM system or an IT management system or a ticketing system, right? So, you know, they've got that covered. I would argue writing a CRM system from scratch today probably doesn't make any sense. There's, you know, you need to have a really good reason to build a new one. Same, I would say, is right for ServiceNow. If you're going to build a new IT service management system or a new, you know, you'd ask yourself the same question. So that's the reason most customers buy them. Now you ask, so how come they still have to customize it and they still have to build? Well, I want to start with the customization piece, which is the little bit, is that while the common functionality is the same, I have to map servers and applications and networks and users and whatever. That's the same regardless of if you're in the IT department of an airline versus a bank versus a, you know, a big retail store. That's the same, but the details are different. So one's going to have, you know, airplane parts and the other one's going to have banking systems. So there is no way around customizing it, basically making it your own. And so that's layer number one. Usually that's not so, you know, that's not so dev heavy, or it could be. However, once that's put in place, where dev kind of gets layered on is that these organizations see the platform, they see the benefit of how quickly they could get something running. Because I mean, by the way, that I should have said that before. You're going to get stuff done way, way faster if you're on a platform that has covered, you know, 80% of what you needed to do scaffolding wise, right? And going back to my point of now that you have something that's working, that same data model could be used, say, for customer service. So instead of building my customer service application from scratch, I'm actually going to build my customer service on the ServiceNow platform as well, because I'm using the same data model and I have access to the same databases. Now you've got both. You're thinking, oh, wait a minute, you know, I've got some HR needs in the company, right? Same thing. I can start it from scratch and then integrate it into ServiceNow because that's got the catalog of who has what laptop and what have you. Or I could build the HR system on top, or some of it, or some of the HR workflows on top of ServiceNow, right? So it just makes a lot of sense for organizations to do a lot of these enterprise apps on a single platform, single data model.
Yeah, makes sense. So and you'll have some good insights and everything here. So obviously lots of people are coming to you all, and frankly lots of people come to us over at Harness with we're going to do more service, or we're doing lots of service now today. We want to do more service now. We're seeing challenges in that DevOps process, that CI/CD process. Frankly, I'm excited to have you on because again, I've only ever built ServiceNow tools or anything in the ServiceNow UI and done the the update sets and everything like that, and that's about as far as I got. So, 101, what are the tools that are going to be available to, others in the space? Obviously, there's very comprehensive out of the box things like what you have at xtype, but if you were to go even lower and just say, hey, if you did have to do this by yourself, like what's going to be available to you? Are there interfacing tools? Are there APIs? Like how would I eat this whale, so to speak?
Yeah. So if you're embarking on, development on the ServiceNow platform and you're thinking about CI/CD, well, number one is ServiceNow has lots of many different tools for building applications. There's a workflow studio. There's a studio development app, which you can connect to Git and have all your code sort of stored in a repository. There are new types of apps coming to the ServiceNow platform. There's even a new programming language called Fluent, which I'm not sure is out yet or not, that will enable customers to build very quickly. And these are what's called pro code development on ServiceNow. Then there is also the whole set of low code tools that are there. But whichever one you touch, at the end of the day, you are making changes to a particular ServiceNow instance when you're developing, regardless of whether you're pushing code into Git or not. And then you're going to have to move your changes or that new code from the instance that you have used to develop to the production instance. And there may be intermediate stages, QA, pre-prod, and what have you. Okay. So how do you manage those movements? Well, you could script them and just write your own scripts. You can go out and find some CI/CD solutions that are out there. There's a really good guy in the ServiceNow ecosystem called Sasha Wildgrube, who has put out a whole very comprehensive set of APIs and white paper on how you can actually do push and pull between instances and have federated development. It's very interesting stuff. You're going to have to build it all yourself, basically.
Right.
And then what xtype does, if I may kind of just give some color in what we do, our aim is to cover the wide spectrum. So large enterprises will have development of all sorts happening on the platform. And so over time, you've got multiple instances that are basically in different states all the time because development's happening here, it's happening there, it's happening here, and happening on there. There's multiple of these instances, but at the end, you're trying to flow all that work into one production system. Another complexity is that you're developing different things that all flow into one. And that's where it kind of gets hard to walk away from the need to have a central control plane, which actually shows you differences and gives you automation and tools to help you manage those instances in the states.
Right, exactly. I'm wondering if there's lessons to be learned from the DB admin community. We have a little kind of sidebar as well. That we're seeing a lot of interest around database governance and everything, and ServiceNow. I'm seeing a lot of similarities between like what we're seeing on a liquid base. They've got the concept of the update set. Liquid base uses change sets and things like that. So maybe there's lessons learned across that community for, hey, it's effectively a very regimented set of instructions that are then done on, effectively logically identical machines. So as long as those two things are true, you can have a multi-environment kind of deployment strategy or synchronization strategy or anything like that.
Yeah,
Uh,
you actually, well, actually, you touched it exactly. It is. We're talking about consistency and synchronization basically across environments that are different. But you touched on another very profound thing, and I kind of whizzed over it before. But another one of the big differences is that the database is given when you're on the platform.
hmm,
ServiceNow has selected the database for you. It's the ServiceNow database. Of course, that has a relational database underneath it, but you have no access to the database itself. So when you get a platform as a service, you're not just getting the hardware that's shared, like an AWS virtual machine or physical machine. Don't think those exist anymore, but you're actually getting the full stack. You're getting the database, you're getting the application layer, you're getting the APIs. It's all done for you. So your access is from the top, if you will, or from the bottom through these things. And every change that you make, every customization or new feature that you introduce will drag with it underlying changes, the database, but you're not going to be controlling those directly because you're in the platform. So the way that the platform manages changes, Liquibase, Salesforce has the same thing. Salesforce got, I believe Salesforce is also called a change set. And ServiceNow has update sets. They're basically the same things. They're records of change that are kept, and then there's an engine on the other instance that knows how to read and implement those changes for you, right? So by the way, that was one of the big aha moments for me, is because when I thought of DevOps, to me, DevOps always starts with Git and just, push and pull and merge, and that's how, and that's how federated development just all kind of ebbs and flows and merges and splits and merges and splits until it, until some point at the end where it just finally merges into this one thing that works. And on a platform, you don't have that because there's code base that's yours and code base that's the other. So instead of trying to force that model on the platform, what we did is we found a way to use the native facilities, those update sets, as the core base to monitor them, to show their exact status across different instances, to synchronize them between instances, to allow developers to put policies on them, CI/CD type policies. When this update set moves, I want you to run that test. Before this update set moves, I need you to run those scans, right? And it's very CI/CD resembling. It's just built in the platform. Same use case, just built in the platform versus trying to build it out of the platform.
I think one question I had, and you bring up we kind of talked through a great point, which is like, DevOps is much easier when the environments you ultimately want to manage the changes between are effectively nearly identical, right? And my background is a lot of federal, and the challenge there is that what you do is you build and test and deploy effectively dev and QA versions of your application in what we call the low side, and then our customers operate in what's called the high side, aka like the secret environments, the top secret environments, etc. And then one of the challenges we see there is like, hey, you're on Kubernetes, the customer's on Kubernetes. You're on Amazon Web Services, the customer's on Amazon Web Services. It should all be the same, right? But inevitably, there's something that is mismatched that causes an issue, and triaging that. Are you guys seeing the same thing in the ServiceNow SaaS environment, or is that far less? Or tell me a bit about that.
No, it's exactly that. It is exactly that. We're seeing it. What you're talking about is inconsistencies between environments, and those inconsistencies inevitably build in an environment like we're working in, because you have multiple teams, right, who are all building on the same environment. And you could just, I mean, so far we just talked about the code. Okay, how do we handle the code, moving the code, testing the code, synchronizing the code across these multiple teams? But then there's also stuff that isn't code related. It could be data, just different data. And the data, sometimes we kind of tend to think data is irrelevant for code. Well, it's not, because a lot of times the data is, like becomes a variable that decides something. And now if you have a different data set, the application behaves differently. That's kind of rare. But then there's other things like a plugin or a third-party app that I use in my app that carries with it a different version of Kubernetes, a different version of some API that's also used by another team. Only those two teams don't know it, right? You don't know it because you're working on your own things. So and it is that point that you have multiple streams, again, different code bases that are not connected, not related, that are all trying to flow into the same thing across inconsistent environments, and then inevitably high production, let's call it, right, is where they all have to kind of align. So where we start is with just monitoring the differences, including production. And we just start by showing the deltas. And that also, talk a little bit of AI and predictions, etc. It helps us kind of be proactively saying, if you push this code, the chances of this working over there are either 100% no-go because we can tell, or we can, say with very high likelihood this is not going to work because of A, B, and C, and we'll flag it, right?
Yeah, you bring up a good point, which is like, even if the underlying platforms and environments are exactly the same, the data is going to be different, high side versus low side, and if high side
configurations, stuff like that.
They'll have a different LDAP configuration. They'll have a different RBAC, SSO
permissions and roles. That role is not there. All kinds of little things that aren't code. So we have to take care of the code, but we also have to take care of our agents.
So how do this is going to be a challenge consistent across every major enterprise, every major massive federal organization. How, from your background and everything in DevOps, how should all of these customers and everybody think about solving that problem, solving the, like, we want consistent deployment, near error-free across all these different environments?
Yeah, so we did think about it, and we went ahead and we implemented it. And it boils down in the end to three main capabilities. First of which is visibility or monitoring, which usually isn't thought of as a starting point for DevOps. It's like, oh, we're going to monitor performance, we're going to monitor user activity, transactions, etc. It's mostly associated with production use cases. The visibility I'm talking about is visibility across environments. It's basically something that replaces your Git repo as the single source of truth, and it is a monitoring capability that doesn't just look at code. It looks at code as number one across those different pillars, but it also looks at the stuff we talked about. It looks at data differences, configuration differences, plugins and other things that may be installed in one environment or not the other, maybe are in different versions, etc. So that's visibility. That's number one. Then the second part is around automation of anything that you can. And this is very DevOps style, right? Make sure that the tests run in concurrently to any code pushes. Make sure that your unit tests, your code scans, all of that, like the CI/CD functionality is all automated. Automate the release into production itself, whether it's creating packages and automating those, integrating them into some sort of schedules, but then use that automation to also create, and that's the third pillar, a governance. Usually we say visibility, governance, and automation. It always starts with visibility. And by governance, I mean, governance is where you take these CI/CD-like automations, but you hook them up to triggers and to avoid consistency, increase compliance. And let me give you an example. So if a change has flown from one instance into a QA instance, and it's now in QA and ready, now I know that the QA instance and this dev instance are inconsistent with my third. So I can have a governance rule that says anything that makes it to QA and is successfully committed needs to flow down, needs to go back to a different development environment so they remain consistent. You got to be smart about it. You don't necessarily always want to push everything, but you have to think about that. What do I need to synchronize? You should do the same for data, right? You should do the same for configurations. You should do the same for plugins or different apps, etc. And that's basically what we say: visibility, governance, and automation. And how you do it, whether you implement it with an open source tool, you build it yourself, you buy a product, that's on you.
Yeah, very nice. So you've been around the block a few times in the DevOps community. This will be kind of a two-part set of questions, but I'll go one by one. I mean, first off is um, what are the DevOps challenges that have remained consistent and haven't been solved since you've since you started working on these, over 2 decades ago?
All right. DevOps is hard. That has not changed. I wasn't there when the mainframe was around, but when I got into the industry, my elders were constantly telling me about DevOps on the mainframe, and I remember it very well. And this was one big computer, right? And they still had challenges. And then we went kind of distributed, and we tried to break up the world into smaller components that interact with each other, believing that this componentization, compartmentalized, sorry, cut that out. The componentization would help, and it just created a myriad of objects, and so that created a whole other mess. We had, right, we had waterfall that was meant to kind of ensure that the projects are up to standard, but then you only do one jump into production. So and that didn't work. So we went agile and we broke up the process, and we decided that there is no more release day. It's just ongoing. At the end of the day, the challenge of building software and operating it is big, and as complexity grows, that remains. If I want to be more specific, I think the premise that you have a production version that is live serving customers and other versions that are being built the whole time, that challenge is never going away, regardless of whether you choose a different architecture, you choose a different development methodology you're going to work with, Scrum, where you're going to use agile boards and waterfalls even, etc. At the end of the day, you're dealing with change in complex systems, and so managing that is just it's a challenge. So you're always going to have that challenge. It hasn't changed, put it that way.
Yeah.
Production still be production.
I mean, have you met individuals that do believe that, like, hey, we don't need a dev QA in prod, we just do everything in prod, changes go directly there? I mean, I have met those people, but I don't know, I'm curious your experiences.
It's funny, I actually run into quite a lot of them, and but this is very specific to I don't know if it's just specific to ServiceNow, but it's specific. I know it from ServiceNow. So when you start out early on a platform like this, things just look so easy. It is so easy to just create a new app. Like, I will write you a new app within 10 minutes, it'll be up and running. And you know what? It's going to handle 1,000 people, registering on it, 10,000 people. So you're Superman, right? And you just do it on production. And then as things scale up a little bit, people are just falling into this thing. So you know what? One of the issues is that developers are always admins, right? And so they're used to it. So if something is wrong, I'm just going to go into production and fix my thing. Where this comes back to bite you is obviously later as you grow, right? And now you have a much more complex environment. Those habits, call them that way, become very detrimental. So I see a whole spectrum of organizations. I see organizations, especially large banks and institutions, who would never allow it because so from day one, they have very stringent processes, etc., which creates another problem. They move very, very slow unless they automate their processes, etc. And then on the flip side, I see organizations that kind of grew And then as they got to scale, they still have those old habits of people just going into production and changing things and doing things and messing everything up.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm gonna clip this out and be like, hey, for all you customers out there that think like, hey, prod is dev, maybe maybe it's easy today, but it's not gonna be so easy tomorrow. So let's keep that in mind. I
Yeah.
so I mentioned this was a kind of a two-parter question. So, and it was a fascinating answer for what it's worth, the idea of like, and frankly, not one I expected, the idea of like the dev QA prod kind of model, or even just a dev prod model, has been a time-tested, battle-hardened model that's worked for DevOps for basically since the beginning. The other question though is, uh, we're in an age where there's AI, there's, lots of new methodologies for automation. What's the future of DevSecOps, or what are the pieces of the future of DevSecOps that maybe you're the most excited about, or that you have insight into?
Yeah. So I am a techno optimist and a techno lover, and so obviously, like everybody else, I spend a lot of time trying to learn or learning about LLMs and how they work and what models look like. And you think about the use cases that are there. We're all familiar with ChatGPT. It's kind of taken us on, and so we're just focused on just text. Us in the dev community, we're all familiar with with Copilot and others, and see how you know coding is getting better on these platforms. But to me, what's exciting is the fundamental notion that these systems predict stuff based off of data that they've seen. And so one of the most exciting things for me is to start seeing the software lifecycle be predicted across everything. So it can start from relative simple, and I say it with all the respect because I haven't seen a good one working it. Simple use cases that a lot of people can think of. Hey, I'm just going to monitor a code base, right? And the code base is my learning thing. And then I'm going to have this AI that just predicts the test. So you don't have to test. You don't have to test. You can get the best coverage with the minimum amount of tests. Or it will automatically decide to only run this test for this release. It will automatically decide I'm only going to need this ABC, and the rest is unnecessary, and this will work with with a very high conviction rate or something like that. So you're going to see a lot of decision making automation in the process, and I can see that sort of, I believe, starts with the use case that I just talked about, but you can expand that to everything. So predicting what tests are needed, maybe writing them ahead of time and then executing them, and then you can go wild with it and say, hey, at the end of the day, if we become really autonomous, then I'd like the system to predict the data and the metrics that the managers want and spit that out. And then if we go into sci-fi, then some AI can decide, hey, in order for us to beat the competition, we need to develop this system, and there we go. I've dreamt it, I've created it, and
Right.
I'm running it.
Like something constantly monitoring all the news, your competitor just came out with this feature. Let's prioritize. They came out with these features. We don't think there's going to be a lot of demand. They came out with this one though. This one we think is killer based on Reddit forums, based on, the user community, etc.
Based on our code base. Based on our code base, we have an advantage. We have an advantage in our code base because we've got this thing, and it can be repurposed to do that will kill this. Crazy stuff like that. I think we're a long ways away. I think it's gonna start with a lot more nuanced.
You bring up so I've interacted a lot with customers, and I think it's very rare to meet developers that love TDD, test-driven development. I think a lot of them just want to write the code. They don't want to do so much with the tests. So, I mean, it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, you're seeing a lot of potential in maybe just recognizing that, hey, and there's almost like a governance piece to it of like, developers for the most part don't like writing tests. So maybe instead of like trying to convince them it's important or anything like that, let's just recognize that's something they're never going to like. It's the diet of, the coding industry, and let's just recognize that and use automations, AI, and everything to get them where they need to go there and let them focus on the value add.
100%. 100%.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. But you got the governance to make sure it happens, but you've got the automations and everything to make it a less stressful or less impactful part of the day.
Yeah, and let developers do the stuff that they love. Let them, write the code, see it work, think it, design it, implement it, push it, see that it works, and then forget about it.
Yeah. I I want to double click on governance because, that selfishly, that's a huge part of what we do at Harness, and that's a huge part of what you guys are doing as well. Um, I think I'll set this question up a little bit. Before I started working here, when I heard governance, I thought paperwork. I thought, oh, it's a review board, it's a cab or something like that. And I think that there's kind of maybe a cultural change as well as, other kind of tech changes and everything that are changing the narrative there. Do you have any thoughts on that, or just curious your take?
Yeah, I'll give you an anonymous example, a story. Okay. So we were working with this very, very large bank and got introduced to their ServiceNow team. They have a huge team, over 300 developers just on ServiceNow, many, many, many instances, and a lot of governance. This is a bank, regulated industry, every change, there's process around it. And they had governance exactly like you described it, right? Paperwork, tons of it. They had paperwork describing the paperwork, right? And then some more paperwork, and then paperwork that you got to do it. And that was the governance model. And I remember my dear friend Huck, who's our chief strategy officer at the time we were looking at it, when we got back, we were heading into a POC. This was one of our earliest customers, and and we got from them a PowerPoint presentation that was 82 slides long that showed their process end to end. And they basically said, okay, this is our process. How are you going to build this with xtype? Because we're going to try to do that. And I remember Huck sending me an email going, this is bullshit. Like, we don't need any of this. Like, out of these 80 slides, there's probably only about 3 that we need. The rest we can just strip away. This is all
Right.
redundant, unnecessary. And I remember saying to him, if we go back and tell them that, they're not going to talk to us. They're just going to ignore us. So we have no choice, my friend. We're going to start this way. We're going to go into their document. We're going to show them exactly where we fit into their existing process right now. And it was painstaking and hard and honestly very frustrating to do that. But we did, and we sent it back, and then we got in, roll forward a year and a half. They're only left with 2 slides. The rest just went away.
Right.
So the moral of the story is that with proper tools, DevOps can become governance and should become governance. That goes beyond just developers, but for that you have to enlist, the people that are sitting on top, that are being liable, accountable for a lot of the stuff. And sometimes for them, we have to work for them too, not just for. Again, this goes back to, if we just love code, that's fine. But sometimes a lot of that other stuff is not really for us. It's to satisfy other people with other needs.
Exactly. No, I mean, that's an incredible story, and I think the lesson to maybe be learned out of that is, like, if you have something that is going to help customers in terms of like making an organizational change, or maybe like a culture change or anything like that, it could be important to meet them where they are first, and then have the conviction that the change will come, but we got to meet them where they are for what it's worth. So
yeah, I mean, look, we're techies, and many times we understand technology better than our customers. So that's why we do what we do, right? That's where we are. But I think we're better off realizing that you can't normally just throw some novel idea on someone, even if you're very convinced and it, and you go, oh, how can you be so, pardon my friend, how can you be so stupid? But look, let me show you this. That's not a very effective way, because the reality is maybe they don't see what you see. Maybe they have been burnt by other stuff before. So, you have to, sometimes you have to if you want to affect change, well, sometimes you have to meet them where they are and then do it over time.
So we're up on time, but I want to hit you with like, 3 or 4 rapid fires just to like, get them out there, and
Let's
we
do
can
it.
take it from there. Yeah. So rapid fire round. Let's go. Uh, you're a techie. You do a lot. What is the most underrated tool in the DevOps space right now?
What is the most underrated tool in the DevOps space right now?
Yeah.
Version control.
Version control. Not love it. What's a buzzword that you wish would go away forever?
Agile.
Agile. Yeah, we could have a whole podcast just about that. Um, and then last one, what is your go-to language of choice for getting an automation done?
I hate to say it, but it's got to be JavaScript.
JavaScript. I think that's the first I've heard it from friends and everybody like that. But hey,
My favorite programming language, the language I really love. So I grew up a C programmer, so that's my core. I did C for a long time, and my favorite language right now is Go. And I love Go, and but when I want to get stuff done quick, it's JavaScript.
JavaScript. And then you just throw that in like a Node.js app, and then that's a command line tool. Nice. I need to pick more of that stuff up. Well, Ron, it's at the top of the hour, and I want to thank you for hopping on Ship Talk, and it's been a pleasure. Any kind of final comments or thoughts to the audience?
No, thank you very much. If you're interested or if you have questions about ServiceNow or platforms, or just think about this niche that we're in, just hit me up. I'm always happy to help, and really appreciate your time. Thank you, Nic. It's great.
All right. Fantastic. Enjoy your day, Ron.
Take care.